So what is your purpose?
Good question. So I think what has always been really important to me is
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to Class de Chats.
Oh, very glad to be here.
Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, so I am Sofia Ouyang. I am a Chinese American composer and conductor, and I'm currently studying at Columbia University. I'm a fourth-year undergraduate there, studying music and philosophy, and I'm also studying at the Juilliard Exchange, studying composition.
You're a senior.
Yes.
Okay, so many things to talk about.
A lot.
Some of you might know that I went to Columbia and I went there for philosophy. I was also at the Juilliard Exchange. So when I found out like 2 minutes ago that you went for philosophy, so we're gonna get there at some point.
Yes,
we have to. But first question, because there's no format to this podcast at all, except that the first question is always, how did you get into music? How did you get into classical?
Yeah, I grew up learning the piano, and I was never very interested in practicing, to be honest. I think oh really? Oh wow, that's amazing. Yes, so I think maybe when I was around early middle school, I started actually liking classical music. I started listening to it. I started, a lot of it was like, I remember really liking the Romantic era, like Liszt, Chopin. And so I listened a lot. I studied in school, like music history, music theory, and I was really interested, but I was not practicing.
Did you come from musicality?
No.
Oh,
but my dad is a poet, so I think and he also listens to classical music, so I think I've had sort of the influence of the arts, I guess, growing up. And I started composing when I was 14, started with a music class assignment. But I think I've always been very creative. So I used to write poems, and then before that I was very interested in, when I was a kid, I really liked discovering insects and butterflies, in nature. So there was always sort of a creativity in me, and I found that expression through composition, I think, over the years. So when I was 14, I started writing, and I was kind of doing it for fun on the side for a few more years. And then I went to a music festival for the first time when I was 16, and seeing people my age doing music and seeing people doing it at such a high level, both in performance and also in composition, was a huge eye-opener. I never thought you can be a composer, and I thought composers were dead. And so being immersed in a musical community of people my age and also getting professional guidance from composers was huge. At 16, I would say growing up, I didn't really have that sense of music community around me. I grew up in China, and so I think that was huge. And then since then, it's just been very organically coming into doing more and more composition, working with people, and trying new forms of music making. And here I am, and I want to be a composer now.
That's cool. So at 14, you started writing. Do you remember what it was like to compose for the first time?
Yeah,
I remember, I had, of course, some assignments in maybe ear training or music theory or something like this. And I remember that when I was maybe a freshman in high school, I would think that I could maybe make a little melody, but it never went anywhere. The closest thing that I ever composed was one little motif or melody, and actually I still remember it now that weirdly, I just remember, I know exactly how it sounds. And I called it the Bird Symphony, but it never, became anything except 2 lines with no other instruments.
Yeah.
So how was it like for you?
So I think I wrote a piano piece, and I remember I was thinking about it a little bit, sort of all the sounds I want, the chords, the melody, and then how they change. So it's a sort of very classical way of thinking about composing the structure. And I remember the beginning was a diminished chord arpeggio downward, and I didn't even know what a diminished chord was at the time. I just liked these 4 notes, and I was I'm gonna make it like a arpeggio. But I found out later that it was a diminished chord. So I think it was exploring with the sound worlds that I was interested in, and then also taking inspiration from the composers I was listening to at the time. It was when I was younger, it was a bit more imitative.
So how would you describe your style has evolved over the years?
That's a hard question. Still discovering it. I think maybe in terms of, talking about it in terms of what I find important to me as a composer right now. It's maybe a better way of thinking about it. Through creating something and through expression of through creating to make sense of something about the world, because I feel like lived experience is super complex and irreducible, and so is art. Like artistic meaning is so ambiguous in many ways. Like you can listen to a melody and you can feel like 10,000 things from it, and you can derive like 100 metaphors, and everyone has a different understanding in some ways to this art. And so I think that to me is really important. And the other thing is that the sense of resonance you can create with people when you, whether it's like you're performing something or you're composing something that is then heard, this idea that other people recognize something universal and common and identify with something that you were feeling when you were creating it. So I think like this is super important to me, and I've been thinking a lot in terms of how can I use what I'm writing to make resonances, but also to make sense of the world for myself, and to also discover myself. And how does this relate to the actual styles that I write? I'm not sure, but I think there's a couple things that I'm very drawn to in musically, like sounds and ways of ranging of sounds. I really like this idea of like this very long, continuous line that is continuous, and like, for example, if it's like a flute or it's like an instrument, clarinet, there's something that continues over time, and there's like changes, but it feels very vocal and it feels very deep. You know, I like that a lot. I also like sounds that are very visceral, intense, lively, and electrifying. It's like you listen to it and it feels like you're just in it, and you feel alive, and you feel really compelled. So I think there's like sounds here and there that I feel very drawn to, and I think I reflect that in what I write as well.
I have to be honest, I have not yet heard your compositions, but I definitely want to, hear some of your pieces for sure now. It's very interesting when you talk about how, you have interest and background also from your father being a poet.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times you think of studying music as, analyzing the notes and what's on the paper, and maybe figuring out the technical aspects of playing if you're a musician. And I feel like there's a lack of maybe emphasis, I would say, on literature and the philosophy and just so many things that, or maybe biology. I thought of Goethe immediately when you were talking about, insects and nature, and then poems. And so at some point you decided, that you want to study more than music.
Yes.
Do you remember how that came to be?
Yeah, so I actually always knew that for undergrad, at least, I wanted to do more than music. I knew that I think going into college, I knew that I wanted probably to focus on music in the future, but I felt like I needed the breadth of knowledge. And especially as a composer, I feel like it is, I think creating is more fundamental to composing. Like composing is a medium of creation, and to create something, it is about the holistic experience and knowledge and feelings and perceptions that I have as a person, and putting that onto paper. So I want to, I want to study philosophy, I want to dabble in literature, I want to be exposed to all the things that liberal arts education gives you. And I guess like my thought was, first of all, I'm curious to learn, and the second of all, I think that's also helpful for me to grow as a composer, to figure out like, why am I doing the arts, and what do I want to say, what is important to me. So I think I've always known that I wanted to study something else as well.
Me too. And I think a lot of times people are very confused when I say that I actually, you are majoring in music as well. No?
Yeah.
So at least you have that, but I never graduated with a music degree.
Oh.
And so people are quite perplexed at times.
Yeah.
Like, how does philosophy help you become a pianist, or how does it translate into your work as a pianist? So for you as a composer, are you able to answer this? I mean, for me, it's like...
Yeah, I'm curious about your...
Because I can't say, like, I got this from philosophy and I'm adding it into, like, my music, like, salt, And so I always struggled to really answer, because it's not really a direct correlation, but sometimes it could be. So, for example, I've been in a deep dive with Schumann, and of course, there's a lot of Goethe philosophy embedded in his thinking, and I can appreciate that aesthetics in his music and just what he looks for in an ideal playing of music or presentation of music. But it's not going to necessarily be explainable. Like, this means I do X, Y, Z as a result of that concept necessarily. But yeah, I'm curious how it's been for you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, but I also think like the whole thing about expressing in the arts is that there is that kind of thing that's like irreducible to words. There's a process of translation that is not capturable in words. That is, for example, I have some thought in me, and then I make art while I'm having this thought, and it changes how I make art. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't know. Maybe it's something like that as well.
I think it changes your energy, your attitude towards the thing that you're doing or the thing that you're making.
Yeah. Probably something like that.
It's like a mindset.
Yeah, I think that's also present in me, but of course it's different at composing because the act of creating is by myself. It's kind of solitary, and I do think studying philosophy and engaging with like literature, that changes how I the kinds of thoughts I have when I'm literally in the act of writing something down. Mm-hmm. I think I'm also I think it also helps me in, let's see, this is not fully related, but I'm also really interested in talking about how people think about music. And
I was going to ask you about this.
Okay. Yeah. So it's, being kind of in the composer world, there's a lot of different aesthetics and things like that going on. Like, people have different aesthetic preferences. Institutions have certain tendencies of aesthetics. And I find that super interesting. Just seeing like what are the aesthetic preconditions that are operating under people when they make a value judgment about what is good art or what is not art. Like that I find that interesting. It's not like directly related to composing, but it's relevant because it's about music and it's about how music is perceived in different communities. Mm-hmm. So that's something.
Yeah. Do you find yourself looking for something when you hear or judge a piece of music as a composer, or just the fact that you have your own aesthetic values?
Yeah, I think I used to be a lot more, like, I used to approach it in a lot more kind of, like, quote-unquote intellectual way. But nowadays, I've been letting go of that a little bit. I've been allowing myself to really just embody what I'm feeling and what I'm hearing, and to just feel, I don't know, like when I go to a concert that I really like, I'd really like interdisciplinary concerts where there's like lighting and there's also like the space is special in some way, then the performers are, like maybe there's some choreography, but obviously music being the main thing, like I like that. Like in those circumstances, just letting go and just enjoying and not having to think, what does this mean? Or like, oh, this is reoccurring. Just enjoying it. I think I've been taking that approach a lot more lately.
Yeah. And I wonder how, if you have any thoughts, how we can encourage more of this, just feel it yourself in a way and experience it, because I don't know if you do this as well, but I've noticed that there is this kind of trend to explain music. Explain your work, whether it actually it's not even just music, could be for works of art that are not musical, and current artists find themselves having to explain and give lots of context and historical moments or specific things to kind of anchor the onlooker or the listener's perspective and approach to their work. And I struggle a little bit to accept this wave just because I feel like it can be very limiting. But it seems to be a trend. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
Right, okay. I do have thoughts on this. So I feel like one reason why this is so actually I just had I was part of a concert, and it was essentially a lecture concert. It was 5 young composers presenting 5 pieces for a large ensemble, and we had to, before each of our pieces, we had to basically give a lecture about our piece. Like, we described what it was about, and then we had to like give excerpts to so that the ensemble was playing excerpts of the piece and we're talking about it. And then they hear the piece, which actually that was very interesting. I've never experienced that before. And I feel like that had merits of its own. Like the audience really had a sense of what are some things to catch for it with the ears when they listen to it. But I do think, yes, there's a tendency to explain. There's a tendency to, write about what I'm trying to do on the program notes for a lot of composers. And I also kind of agree with you that overall, sometimes it takes you out of the art. It takes you out of the appreciation of it.
But why are people asking for this?
I feel like with contemporary music, it is kind of, it requires quite a bit of knowledge and background to be at a place where you can notice more things about what's going on. And I think it's a little bit inaccessible. This, I think, is one of the big problems of contemporary concert music, where at least for example, the aesthetic language, the musical language I'm working with is considered kind of very dissonant, or like it's hard to appreciate it if you've never heard music like this before. It takes time. And so I think that's a problem, that like the accessibility and how much it can get to people, like that's a problem. But I feel like maybe one way to work towards resolving that is thinking about curation and thinking about how you curate concerts, or how you curate performing arts experiences that can be more accessible but also meaningful, not just taking away from the art, but like actually I don't know, I'm thinking maybe something that is multidisciplinary. I think that's always really helpful when you have like multiple elements interacting, and it's like one like 2 hour or 1 hour long experience that was compelling and captivating in some ways. And then they can have elements that is harder to accept, quote unquote, but somehow it's introduced and beamed into this like multi-sensorial experience. I don't know, like that was sort of an idea.
Is that how you present your music, like other disciplines?
I've dabbled in that, and I want to do more. I want to do a lot more.
What have you chosen?
Yeah, so
your other disciplines.
Well, I feel like my primary craft is composing. I also conduct a little bit, and I had this project where I worked with visual artists, and we also created a video together, and I had some fixed media electronics, and there was also written scores, like it was for flute and soprano and percussion, and then we also had a lighting designer work with us, so it was that was sort of the most interdisciplinary project I've done so far, and that was, I think, a really good experience.
When you say multidisciplinary and you just brought up the lights, I think of opera.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I mean, yeah, it's like the most... Yeah, it's like a very... I totally agree. Also, like with voice and with text, with literature, opera is so holistic and what it can do. And I think contemporary opera, like, even expands that even further. It can, come into opera. Yeah.
What is a typical day of composing like for you?
So I have like periods where I'm more like that, and I have periods where I'm not writing, just not. I think when I am writing something, I tend to start with concepts. Like I start with being on the page and having words, writing down words, sketching movements, sketching like very silly pencil drawings of like somehow like visualizing some music. And so I just use like mostly words and sketches to try to capture something musical. And sometimes the concepts I start with is not musical at all. And I think there's like many layers and processes of translation for me, going from concepts, like linguistic concepts sometimes, and going from like drawings into I don't know, sometimes a structure of what this could look like musically, sometimes just like moments that I want to happen musically, like this is what I envision this to be. And then there's like many different parameters that happen to it, because I think when you compose, it's about figuring out what to do with each parameter over time, like rhythm. How does rhythm change? How does instrumentation change? How does the color change? So really like just kind of having a cloud of all of these things, writing down as much as you can figure out in the moment, and then sorting those ideas into something more coherent, and then something more coherent, and then still writing. Like it's like, for me, it's kind of a linear process, and it takes a while. It takes a long time.
Yeah. It reminds me of how I do a research paper or an essay actually, and like for philosophy essays, I would write down all of the different viewpoints and all the quotes that I might need and what I'm trying to argue here and there, but it's never really fully formed as a logical essay at all until like I actually start writing the essay. But that's still not my own thoughts purely because it's me arguing for another philosopher, like a homework assignment or something. But you mentioned linguistic concepts or something not musical. So do you have like a concrete example of what that could be like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is not so much like a concept per se, but I have this stream project called Insects, and yeah, I mean, it's not, the word itself, like the idea of insects, it's not immediately we're inherently musical, but obviously when we think about insects, there's a lot of what you can imagine sonically insects to be, and so that's where I started. So I went from thinking about insects to thinking about, okay, so I want to capture 3 moments of sounds that I can imagine insects to make, but I don't want them to be like, the objective capturing of insect sounds. I wanted it specifically to be 3 angles a person standing situated perceives the insects. So I had it was like 3 miniatures, and the first miniature was I imagined a person to be standing really far away, and there's a swarm of insects, and they're very indistinguishable. They're just like this cloud, and then so the sound is also like a mass of sound. So that's sort of the first miniature, and the second one was this person moves closer to the swarm of insects. There's still a lot of them, but he or she or they distinguish individuals. So the sound was a lot more distinct, but still it was sort of it sounded mechanical and alienating. That was what I wanted to capture. And then the third miniature is individual insects, like tiny sounds, like this little ant walking, or like a cricket like chirping or something like that. And they're just like very small sounds, very silent, but like things are happening. But so I guess like, I went from the concept to what kind of presentation, what frame, and then into what does that mean musically. So there's a lot of translation going on. I think there's a lot of like change, and obviously I also think actually going from notation to performance is also a process of translation. It's like I've been thinking a lot about this and talking about it to my performer friends, but I find it fascinating. Like part of what I find fascinating about composing is also working with people, and every performance is different. Every musician interacting with their score sees it differently, and I find that super fascinating, like how the possibilities of meaning and expression, that really generates so much because of the different individuals interpreting what this phrase means, but also what this piece means. Like there's so many different layers of interpretation, and so I find that fascinating. That to me is also process translation. Obviously, having the piece played and then people listening to it, reacting in their own ways. That's like 1,000 different translations. So I've been thinking a lot about composing and art making as these processes of translation, and through these processes, there's more meaning generated because there's new things generated.
So what do you hope people listening to, let's say, Insects, take away, if anything?
I think hopefully it creates some sort of resonance or identification, like, I guess like, but like I never imagined the sounds of insects to be like this, or this is exactly what I thought insects would be like any sort of reaction that is a strong reaction would be good. I think that's
And it's very interesting because I spend most of my time guessing, wondering what the composers are thinking.
Oh.
And some of them will be like, they tell you sometimes very specifically what they're thinking about. Maybe they write along with the piece of music, let's say, like they put like a title that's very immediately understandable versus like Sonata Number 1, you know. And so it's interesting hearing a living composer. I think you're living.
We're bringing a jar.
Talk about how you come up with new pieces of music, because I spent so much of the time not being able to do that, and I always say I don't have the creative brains for it. Like if you tell me sit down and write something, I can't do that. And I wonder, you know, how do you know when you have something to say and something to write and compose?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of an intrinsic drive a little bit for me. Like I want to create, I want to express, I want to figure out how I can translate linguistic ideas into music, and like that's super interesting for me. And so I think there's that, and I think it's also, you know, everything I'm doing, but once I finish writing this piece, it kind of becomes a thing of its own. Like it's not, it goes outside of my control a little bit. There will be meanings and discoveries of this piece or this work that I am not in control of, that is there, but I didn't know it was there when I was writing it. I really believe in that. So.
Yeah, so here's another question. So when you look back at you know, past composers who are not living in front of me, and it is very common for, let's say, musicologists or maybe even musicians to read back their letters and their biographies and try to think, what were they thinking about when they were composing that piece? Oh, maybe this heartbreak caused this piece of music. Maybe it was this particular life event, or maybe it's this letter. So then as a 21st century composer, would somebody reading your text messages and your emails help understand your music?
That's such an interesting never thought of it before. Probably because it's a very like retrospective, like going back to this. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe
like you're still living in the moment.
Yeah. So like
it's
I
not
feel
done
like
yet.
Right now it's like asking questions. I'll talk to you. You know, that feeling. I feel like the like looking at secondary sources is a lot more like, I don't know, after you're dead, or like 30 years after, and you're looking at the early stage of this composer's life. But I guess maybe, but I don't.
Yeah, just like imagine if, you know,
that's interesting.
200 years from now, we're both dead.
Yes.
And people find our text messages.
Uh-huh.
And of course, you're the one that actually wrote music, so they're going to go back and try to figure out, you know, who you are. Will that actually help them understand your music 200 years from now?
Okay, I feel like my immediate thought is no, but probably yes. I just don't. Yeah, I don't know. It's.
You're still in like the first person perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to detach. Yeah.
It's just a scary thought for me, because I don't really want to read composers' letters unless, let's say, I take Clara Schumann as an example. She purposely published a collection of Robert Schumann's letters as a way to save his reputation, because he was basically known as a madman who committed suicide, that kind of crazy man, and then she wanted to do something about it, so she published the letters. So that collection I read, because I felt like I had the permission of somebody close to him.
Right.
But it is such a strange thought.
It is, yeah.
You know, to have somebody guess who you are and try to understand your work from that. Because you were saying that sometimes, you know, your music has its own existence independent of you after a while.
Yes, it feels like that's something.
Right, and so then what would help somebody understand your music?
Okay, I think I just thought of another thing, like on this conversation, which usually when people do that to a composer or like to someone, it's usually like centered around big events that happened and that you kind of assume would probably cause some change in how they approach and how they write, where like it would impact how they write. So I think in that framework, yes, like if there's like big events in this, whether it's me or like some other living composer's life, and you study that retrospectively, maybe you get something about how this event has impacted your life. But if it's just like daily messages, I think it's harder to see how this can directly impact what you're creating.
But imagine if suddenly, somebody dug up all the letters and discovered that, let's say, Beethoven actually kept a whole, daily diary of his entire life. People would go crazy trying to figure out who he was.
Yeah.
And then try to understand his music differently, I feel like, or maybe in another way, or in a...
Yeah.
And I wonder, where is there a line between, the person that you are and the composer that you are in your music?
I think there's definitely a line. I also feel
Should
like
there be a line?
oh.
I don't know, just like a lot of
real line.
a lot of questions.
That's a good question. Not sure. I do think when you interpret artwork or like you interpret a piece of music that's composed, for me personally, I think the composer's self, like the composer, the intention of the composer, and the word intention being implying to as much things as possible, like, because it could be a lot of things, right? I think it's not just, I'm writing this piece to make this mean about that, because when I'm writing, I have a lot of intentions, and they seem to bring the piece here and there, and I'm sometimes aware of it, sometimes I'm not. And so intention holistically, what you can glean, is super important, I think. And it's important in how you interpret the music. But there's also like something else about music that's beyond anything the composer intended. I think that's also there. So it's not just one or the other. It's kind of both. You have to like understand where the composer is coming from culturally, aesthetically, intellectually, ideologically, or whatever, like all of this. And then personally, maybe personal life as well, being a part of it. And then there's like, I guess like your own understanding of this work that is also imbuing something of yourself, like as a performer maybe. Like, I don't know, like for me, I think of also actor. I think that's a very good metaphor. It's like playwright, the script, the actor embodying the script, but also bringing a part of themselves. And that also adds to the artwork. So it's not just what is on the page. So yeah, and so it's not just about the composer's intentions, but that's important. I do think that's important.
That's reminding me of so many concepts in the class. Intentions of the writer.
Oh gosh,
of
yeah.
The artist.
Took so much from class.
What did you take? Are there like memorable moments since you are seniors, or you've been in there a couple years?
Yes.
Were there moments of philosophical concepts in class that just like inspired you?
Totally. I think a lot of what we did in philosophy of art, this question of what is morality in art, like what is whether something that is morally good or morally depraved.
Yeah, but going back to morality then, is there morality in your music?
I think not explicitly. I'm still figuring out how I would want to incorporate morality or like more social political thoughts into my music. Like currently it's sort of more exploring like art and language and meaning a little bit more, I would say. Yeah.
So then what's next for you?
Oh, what's next?
I mean, I know grad apps, but...
Yes. That first.
So you want to go into school more?
I want to go into more school. I think I'm at the point of the career where like being associated with an institution is really helpful, like as a composer. And I want to just do a lot more projects that I like, and I want to work with people that I'm inspired by and I admire. I'm thinking especially, I'm really interested in exploring more interdisciplinary collaborations. Yes, this opera, I think I'm really interested in voice, writing for voice, language, putting language into music, and working with like legibility and illegibility of words when I do that. Mm-hmm. I also really just like a lot of the more conventional formats of like classical music, which is like, orchestra, choir, chamber, solo. Like I love all of that. I want to delve into electronics more, especially electronics. And I also want to explore some Chinese traditional instruments, and also see how that aspect of my kind of heritage and cultural identity can be fused with what I'm doing. So that's what I'm looking.
That's exciting. Lots of things to explore.
Yes, a lot of things to explore.
I guess the last question: classical, contemporary. Classical, contemporary. Where do you see yourself in that whole labeling or not labeling?
So I guess like how I see myself is I'm very in both like the aesthetics and the musical language I'm working with, and you know the instruments I'm working with and all of that. I'm very ingrained in the classical tradition, and it's sort of I see it as sort of being constantly in dialogue with that tradition, that history, that is, and kind of in a way being a part of it, right? Being in the present of it and the future of it, and being in dialogue with it. I think that's how I see it. There's definitely, I think, a tendency to see classical music as being in the past, or like as like we are conserving something of the past. But I agree with you in thinking that, first of all, I think it, you know, that tendency is there, and that's fine. But it's also in the present. It's existing here, and it is for everyone. Like exactly like here.
That is the hub.
Yeah, like anyone can. Of course, there's questions of accessibility and you know, like maybe a lot of music being associated with like a certain class a little bit more historically, but I also think it should be for as much people that appreciate it as possible. And contemporary, like being a composer now is interacting with this history and also creating something new that is always irrelevant to what has come before.
Okay, follow-up question. I know that was supposed to be the last question, but then I had another thought. You were saying, you know, accessibility again.
Yes.
Do you find yourself having to be more accessible because you're in 24th century?
No. It's actually, I feel like...
Is that like a real concern at all?
It is concern. I think being a composer and kind of writing music that is not... Like, to me, I think it's a kind of more niche community. As I mentioned before, it's a little bit more difficult to appreciate, I think, just aesthetically, the kinds of sounds that I'm creating, or like a lot of composers are doing. And so that is something that I'm thinking about. I think it's something that I'm aware of, and I feel like it's a problem. Like, I hope it can be more accessible. Maybe maybe one way to do it, as I mentioned, was thinking about curation, thinking about what venues and where are these pieces being presented and how are they being presented. I think that's a place we can really work on. But I would say contemporary concert music, quote unquote, new music, let's say with the capital and is not super. It is a bit more niche, even more than like classical music right now. Yeah.
What's the future of that?
Future.
Is it going to be this niche?
I mean,
going forward.
Yes, I mean, I my hope is that it reaches more people, I think, and it reaches more communities, and it reaches more ways of presenting it. I think that would be really great. Yeah.
This is so enjoyable. Thank you.
Totally,
Finally, somebody who also studied philosophy and music, and it's like
it was a wonderful chat. Yeah.
Thank
you
you
so much for inviting.
yeah. Bye.